2019 is coming to a close. So Derrell, as we're wrapping up 2019, how would you assess the cattle and beef markets?
Well, you can look at it a couple different ways, right? So on the one hand, we've had, continued increases in beef production, and yet we've held prices, on average, relatively stable despite that. So you can look at that fairly positively. On the other hand, certainly the second half of the year has had more challenges than we sort of expected in the first half of the year. So we've had some additional uncertainty. Feed markets are uncertain. Of course, we've had continued uncertainty with a lot of the trade issues and other things. We had a packing plant fire, which caused some disruption in the market for a few weeks. So the second half's been a little bit more of a challenge, but then now, right at the end of the year, we've seen a pretty nice recovery in these markets, and I think we're ending the year on a pretty strong note.
So there was some news recently that Japan recently ratified a bilateral trade agreement with the United States. How's that going to impact beef markets?
Well, this is something we've been looking forward to. If you remember the history here, of course, the U.S. pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership about 2 years ago, and the rest of the countries went on without us. And so the new revised agreement without the U.S. took effect earlier this year, and that put the U.S. at a fairly significant tariff disadvantage. And so this agreement really kind of recovers us back to a more competitive position. We had started to see in the last 2 or 3 months of monthly trade data that we were losing some share in that Japanese market, which is very important. It's our biggest beef export market. And so this hopefully will stop that erosion and get us back to a fairly competitive position relative to that, the rest of those countries in that agreement.
Looking ahead to 2020, how are things setting up for the cattle and beef markets?
Well, again, beef production, first of all, cattle inventories have probably peaked out. We're expecting little to no change. They could even be slightly smaller on January 1. In fact, some people think they will be smaller. I think they'll be minimally smaller, if anything, come January 1. Beef production will probably be slightly higher in 2020 on a year-over-year basis, but minimally so. And so again, as long as beef demand remains strong, then we're talking about a fairly stable environment for the most part as we go forward within the beef industry. There's no real imbalances, if you will, that need to get corrected in the beef industry.
So does that mean higher cattle prices?
Well, I think there's a chance that we see modestly higher prices. Certainly stability is implied here, stable prices with some chance of slightly higher prices. Again, I may be a little less bullish than some other analysts at this point in time, but I do think it's certainly possible that we see some strength as we go forward, assuming nothing really changes relative to the conditions we see today.
So, as one year ends and another is about to begin, we always ask you, what should cattle producers look for or be aware of going into the next year?
Given everything we just said, again, within the beef industry, there's not a lot of factors that are out of line. Obviously, we're keeping an eye on beef demand as we go forward. We're going to have record level meat supplies, so we continue to watch that demand to see if that turns into a bigger issue than it has been. But the biggest factor that can change the trajectory of the beef market in 2020 would be these external environments, the trade agreements, all of the general macroeconomic and global market things. And of course, not to mention probably the biggest wild card next year is the fact that it's a presidential election year. So we really have to keep an eye on the impacts that might have in that bigger environment and what that might change for the beef industry.
All right, thanks, Derrell. Dr. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.